This happened years ago, in about 1997 when I was 12 or 13, and I still haven't come up with a good explanation for it. My mum and I decided to repaint my bedroom. So this particular day, we started by moving all of my furniture into the center of the room, apart from my bed, which we moved in pieces onto the landing outside my bedroom. The bed was a single divan, so there was a fairly sturdy base, with drawers in, so heavy too. And then there was a headboard, a mattress, and bedding. At the time, we lived in a big Victorian house. I'm in England. And my bedroom was down a long corridor, with the other three bedrooms in the opposite side of the house. For context, I never really liked that house and had a bad feeling about it right from when we moved in, when I was 4. And other people said the same over the years too. There were a few other odd occurrences too, but this one was the weirdest by far. So that day, we closed my bedroom door and set to painting my walls. This took all afternoon, though we had a break, so we're in and out of my bedroom a couple times. Once we'd finished painting, my mum had an appointment for a plumber to come round to diagnose a problem with the boiler. It wasn't there long, maybe 10 minutes at most. And then we had dinner. It was early evening when my mum said we could probably put all my furniture back into my room and get it ready for me to sleep that night. However, we moved all the furniture from the middle of my room back into place, then went to get my bed and it was just gone. We couldn't work out where it was and probably stood in the corridor outside my bedroom for 5 minutes discussing whether we were losing our minds. Then we set off looking for it, checking other rooms, and eventually I found it. In my mum's bedroom, on top of my mum's bed. It was set out exactly as it should be, with the div and base the right way up, the mattress on top, the headboard in the right place, etc. It was ready to be slept on, except it was on top of my mum's bed, in her bedroom. I can still remember the feeling I had pushing open my mum's bedroom door, and seeing it, and just knowing something really freaking weird had happened. I was really scared, and so was my mum. Though initially she tried to hide it, saying things like, there has to be an explanation, etc. However, we talked it round endlessly and have done 100 times since, and we've never come up with an explanation. My mum even called the plumber that night to ask if he'd moved it, and he was very perplexed and said no, because why would he have done? And more importantly, how could he have done when he was only there for 10 minutes and was checking something on the boiler the whole time? I should also add that my sister, aged 10, was in the house at the time of this incident, but was watching films and playing downstairs. She also freaked out and started crying, which earned me a ban of ever talking about it in front of her. The layout of the house meant the bed had to have been moved along the corridor from my room and then moved round 3 corners to get into my mum's bedroom, before being lifted up onto her bed. It was a 2-person job for us to move it back, and because the base was bulky, I think even someone really strong would have struggled to move it alone. So I feel certain the plumber couldn't have done it, and neither could my little sister. One thing I've always wondered is at what point the bed moved. We were in and out of my bedroom all day, but we only noticed it wasn't there when we went to put it back. I have no idea what happened, but when I think about it now, it still freaks me the fuck out. When I was 8 or 9, I was in the bathroom and for some reason I decided to stand underneath the vent. I don't know what prompted this need to stand directly under the vent, but I did so anyway. I was brushing my hair and humming when suddenly a woman's voice, she sounded 40-ish, told me to look up. This scared me so much that I bolted down the stairs to ask my mom, who was very young, just to find that I was home alone. A lot of creepy stuff happened at that house, but surprisingly the house was incredibly new. I bolted to my best friend's house. She lived next door. it didn't end there. I lived in the same house, and the houses were packed together really tight. A large gutter was attached to the house, 2 stories, next to mine, my best friend's house. There were windows, but they didn't open except for a small inch. I had a window that faced the gutter. One night, I was in my bedroom looking out the window. It was on the second floor. I had looked out initially because I had heard little clanging noises and assumed my friend was pushing small rocks through that little inch gap. When I peeked the curtains a tiny bit, a person was standing on the gutter, trying to peer into my room. I immediately screamed and yelled at my sister to get my mom, and that there was someone on the gutter. While my sister and I cried hysterically, my mom ran in and looked through the curtains. No one was there. This occurred 2 weeks after the first event. My sister and I swear to this day that a person or thing was looking through our curtains that night. My family moved out barely a month later. Before we moved, the creepy events continued so often that we stayed at a hotel most nights. Some of which were knocks on the ceiling, rustling in vents, and sometimes people looking through windows. The house was torn down a year after we moved. So first, I have to explain the story as best as I can. Basically, my family and I moved into this house a while ago, maybe like 8 years or so. But ever since we moved out, my family swears they keep seeing things around the house. I've actually moved out with my boyfriend not that long ago, but I still visit very often. Very specifically, my family thinks they see a ghost around the house that looks exactly like me, and it's freaking me out. And I know it's not me that they're seeing, because the times where they see this ghost don't make sense, and sometimes I'm not even home. It's happened a couple times, but I'll just write down a few examples. The first time it happened, I was playing on the computer in my parents' room when I noticed my mom walk down the hallway to my room. She called out my name, and I asked her what's up. She came out really confused because according to her, she had followed me all the way from the kitchen into my closet in my room. When she got to the closet, there was no one there. I had been on the computer the whole time. I was even on it when I saw her pass her room to go into my own. When she told me this, it really freaked me out, and I just told her I didn't want to keep talking about it. I get scared super easily. The second time, I was helping my mom out with groceries. She was in the garage bringing bags in, and I was in the kitchen putting everything away. While I was putting something up, she came in all mad, saying that she was struggling to get some bags and I was just standing beside her watching her struggle. But that wasn't me. Apparently, I was watching her struggling to pick up some bags from the truck floor. And when she turned around to ask me for help, I just stared her down. Again, that really scared me. Another time, my dad was telling me about something that happened when he was taking care of my sisters while my mom and I were out. Now, my dad does not believe in any kind of ghosts or supernatural things. But apparently, while taking care of my sisters, my dad heard what sounded like someone trying to open the sliding door that leads to the backyard. He immediately got up and went to check on the door to make sure no one wanted to break in or something. But when he got there, the door was shaking by itself, very violently. It looks like someone was trying to really hard to try to open the door, and had the lock stick on being on the other side to keep it closed, the door would have slid open. It stopped about a few seconds when my dad got there. Even my dad got scared, and I've never seen him this freaked out before. My 2 little sisters also heard the door. Now, I had personally never had a supernatural experience in the house, but a few weeks before I moved out, I was home alone. I was taking a shower and I heard a huge bang. It sounded like the front door had been swung open, and then after that, it started sounding like someone was opening and closing doors and cabinets. I was so scared because it sounded like someone had broken into the house. I was defenseless and in the freaking shower. So I got out the shower, grabbed my phone, and called my mom, crying. All the while, doors and cabinets were still opening and closing. My dad got onto the cameras they have in the house, and they didn't see anyone. There was no one in the house, and nothing was being moved around. It stopped after my dad said that through the phone. Those are some of the examples of what's been going on. It terrifies me to think that one day I could possibly be staring right at someone who looks exactly like me in the middle of the night. I've never seen her, and I don't want to. What could it mean that the ghost looks exactly like me? I went to Toronto when I was 15. I was staying with a Filipino family. They lived in a huge condo, and back then, I barely spoke English. I got lost in the subway line, and it was midnight when I took the elevator. I was so drowsy and weary that I forgot which flat I was staying in, so I pressed the bottoms as my gut said. The elevator started going up and down flats. It didn't take a lot of time, but it was as if many people had called for it on random floors. When it reached the 10th, it was pitch black. There was nothing, even less a freaking floor. I smashed the door close button, and the doors closed after the elevator had taken its sweet time. I got so afraid that I decided to go down to the lobby and climb the emergency stairs as fast as a 15-year-old me could. After that experience, I think that I unwittingly remembered where I was staying, so I climbed to the 12th flat, and when I did so, it was 3 a.m. So it took me a whole hour to climb the stairs, but it couldn't have taken me more than 1.5 hours to return to the apartment. So I cannot believe that I was about 2 hours inside the elevator, lost in whatever kind of limbo that dark flat was. When I was 17, I made reading English stories out loud a habit in order to get used to pronouncing the language. I never cared about a knocking sound coming out the street next to my room. I got my room surrounded by windows, so I always find myself hearing just everything from the street. So this knocking on a wall was nothing special. But one day, as I was reading my daily story out loud, I jumped from my bed when I heard this freaking knocking from outside my window. And you know, I live in the freaking second floor. So from then on, things started to become really, really messed up. Every freaking night at 8 or 9 p.m., a putrid stench appeared in my room, and I can tell you my brother and mother smelled it too. We cleaned my room and checked any nook and cranny, but failed to find anything that could have been rotting and causing that stench. The knockings didn't stop, by the way. They kept on happening, even beginning from afar and getting closer, until reaching my window. My door kept on slamming shut or open, and with all this and my school life, I was sleep deprived almost every day. One day, I reached my limit and slept like a log, but in the middle of the night, a voice from beside my bed woke me up and kept insisting on continuing my storytelling. I couldn't even react or be afraid. I was exhausted to the point I unwittingly tried to just mutter whatever for it to leave me at ease. I couldn't, of course. Then one fateful day, my aunt came to talk to me and told me, "Do not worry. I have told that imp to leave you alone. It came to me in a dream and I told him off. He was so engrossed with your storytelling." I was shocked, and from then on, it stopped for good. Some years ago, I worked for a solar firm as a warehouse manager. I was in charge of their warehouse, which was located at the Kipapa Caves. The warehouse was 2 rented caves in the surrounding lots, which were fenced in. These caves were old military storage units dug into the gulch walls. The caves were about 200 feet deep, 20 feet wide and tall, reinforced with concrete. The solar firms stored their equipment and materials in the caves. The lots were where their vehicles, heavy machinery, and a few 40-inch containers were held. I worked there with my driver. The caves had no electricity or plumbing, so a solar system and backup generator powered the caves and a porta potty provided relief. Call reception was spotty at best, so I'd have to drive out to make the calls. When I started working there, I had no information on the history of Kipapa Gulch. My work schedule was 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. When I started work, a lot of times it was still dark, so when I got there, I had to power up the caves. If the batteries of the solar system didn't have enough juice, I'd have to power up the generator. I'd normally have to do this using only the light from my phone. It was pretty quiet at our units. The neighbouring caves were quite a distance away, and they were primarily used as storage, so we really didn't see anyone around. Rarely a truck would pass by going up to the units further up the gulch. At first, it was like any other workplace, nothing out of the ordinary. But soon after, I started to notice some weird happenings. The first thing I noticed that was weird was the dead animals. Walking around the site, I would find dead Jackson chameleons all over the place. They were just there on the ground, dead. I figured cats were getting them, but I also noticed their carcasses were intact without damage. Looks like they just fell from the trees around the caves. There were also a lot of dead mongoose, minor birds, owls, pigeons, and ducks. All intact carcasses with no predatory marks like bites or scratches. Pretty weird, yeah? Now onto the really weird stuff. Every few days or so, I would hear banging coming from inside the containers. The containers were under lock and key. Every time I would hear the banging, I would have to unlock and open the containers and make sure nobody was inside. I would open the containers, find nobody or any animals inside. After a few weeks of this, I said fuck it and stopped checking. I figured the materials inside were adjusting to temperature changes. Okay. While working in the cave one day, walking to the back end, passing a certain spot, I smelled the strong sense of body odor. It was like I passed by very close to somebody, but nobody was there in the cave that day, but me. I walked to the back of the cave, did what I needed to do back there, and proceeded to walk back to the front of the cave. As soon as I got to the spot where I first smelled the BO, I again smelled the strong odor. Just as before, it seemed like I just passed by very close to somebody. I got to the entrance of the cave and quickly checked if I forgot to put deodorant on during my morning routine. But no, I did have my deodorant on. My mind playing tricks on me? I had a small desk set up at the entrance of the cave where I would work on a laptop. I would check emails from the office and do paperwork. Every so often, I would hear noises coming from the back of the caves. The noises were like something moving, and it sounded like something large, bigger than a mongoose or cat. At first, I would go back and check it out, but after quite a few times of finding nothing there, I said fuck it. I chalked it up to equipment adjusting to temperature changes. Okay, again. One early morning, while it was still dark, before my driver left on his route, we heard a woman screaming coming from above the caves. The gulch walls were about 100 feet up, and the sounds came from up top. It sounded like domestics and went on for about 15 minutes. My driver and I figured there was subdivision up there, and a couple were having it out. A few weeks later, during a lull in work, my driver and I decided to drive up the gulch and check out the other caves. We drove about a mile up the gulch and came to the last cave. From there, we could see our cave and what was directly above it. To our amazement, on the plateau above our cave, there was no subdivision, no house, no roads, no nothing. Who was up there screaming? What the fuck? We had a lot of machinery, vehicles, electronics, mechanical equipment, solar systems, etc. Everything would seem to crap out, even our personal vehicles and property. We would have to call our technicians to come and repair the equipment and machinery. They were constantly there repairing stuff. But what was weird was a lot of times they would come down and find nothing wrong with the equipment, where all of a sudden the equipment started to work fine. After a while of this, we started to video ourselves starting up equipment so we could show them we were doing it correctly and the equipment in fact was not working before we called for repair. But this is the creepiest thing that happened to me there. One day, I loaded my driver up and he left for his route. I then had to go do my business. I went into the porta potty and locked the door. Before I could do anything, the stall began to shake back and forth. I yelled out thinking my driver came back and was playing a trick on me. I unlocked the door, hopped out thinking I would find my driver laughing. But no one was there. I ran up the cave to see if anybody was around. Again, nobody there. I called my driver, the call went through and he was already on the freeway. He thought I was crazy after I told him what happened. After that, I tried not to use the porta potty as much as I could. After a year there, I was laid off due to a slump in the solar business. Only then, I decided to seek out the history of the place. Look up the history of an old Hawaii Kipapa Gulch and let me know what you think. My 23 non-binary boyfriend, 25 male, and I moved into a new apartment in May this year, and we have been experiencing some weird things since then. The first thing I noticed was when I was sleeping in one morning. My boyfriend was already awake playing video games in the living room. I was woken up to a woman's voice that sounded like a very soft and gentle voice, but also sounded like the woman was very serious. It sounded urgent. She just said, "No, no, 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 no," each no sounding more pronounced. I woke up very confused and assumed that my boyfriend had a guest over. It sounded like a disagreement, so I quickly got out of bed and went to see what was wrong. I swear, on the way to the living room, I was still hearing mumbling voices in a conversation. I'm sure you guessed. There was no one there. When I talked to my boyfriend, he said there wasn't any voice. His video games were plugged into his headset, so it wasn't the TV. I've had experiences with hallucinations when falling asleep or waking up in my younger years, although it had been years since that last happened. I assumed it was just that and thought nothing more of it. That was until my boyfriend started experiencing things as well. A couple nights later, he woke up to the same voice. He described it as an older woman's voice that was soft and gentle, and it said, "No, no, don't worry about it, I've got it." It again sounded clear, as if he was just having a conversation with someone in the room. This one somehow scares me more. He said he was waking but fully awake when he heard it. At first, he thought it was me, but I was still asleep. He shook me awake because he was so unnerved. The scariest thing was maybe a couple of weeks after that. My boyfriend had gotten up to pee in the middle of the night, and when he came back, I was sitting up and looking at him. Or more accurately, my side of the bed had a figure sitting up looking at him, but it wasn't me. It took my boyfriend a moment to realize he could also see me, laying in my normal spot. It was like this figure was sitting up on top of me. Someone else was in my spot too, just staring at my boyfriend. He turned on the light, waking me up, but when he did, the figure vanished. He was very shaken up then too. I always hear noises when I'm home alone. We've had paranormal experiences in the past, but not like this. We smudge every time something scary happens and things lighten up for a couple days. But considering there was nothing for the first 3 months we lived here, I'm nervous this is escalating. Any advice or feedback is appreciated. Before I begin the encounter, I would like to provide backstory. I live in Pennsylvania, and during this particular encounter, I was at my aunt's. She has 3 kids, and her house is about 3 to 5 miles down a remote dirt road off of a highway through a rural area. She's approximately 25 minutes away from a store and 35 away from the police. And before I start, understand that I do not usually believe in supernatural things. It was about 3 or 4 months ago. I was at my aunt's for a birthday party. Got there at around 2 p.m., and by 7 p.m., we were ready to leave. My cousins, her kids, asked if I could stay over because they don't see me very often. I agreed, as I would enjoy my time with them. So, after the party, and after everyone had left, it was my aunt, her 3 kids, and her husband and I. My aunt and uncle went to bed around 9:30 or 10 p.m. I stayed up with the youngest cousin, who we will call Amy. Amy and I were in the living room watching some Criminal Minds up until about 11 p.m. She decided to go to bed, and I stayed up watching the show. Mind you, it's now pitch black outside, and I am in the middle of the woods. For this factor, they had motion-activated lights outside. As I was watching television on the couch, which was against the window, I noticed that the light outside turns on. My heart is beating, seeing as it's the middle of the woods and people should not be around the house. I looked out, and it luckily was just a deer about 20 to 30 feet out by the tree line. Since it was only a deer, I went back to watching my show. Of course the deer was cute. Nothing to be worried about. Right? 5 minutes passed by and the lights shut off. Still watching Criminal Minds, I gather my blankets and pillows to get ready for bed as I was sleeping in the living room that night. As I'm settling the pillows on the couch and laying the blanket down, a sudden bright flash startled me. It's the motion-activated light outside of the living room window. Before I even looked, I thought to myself, it was just a deer again. However, I looked out again reluctantly. There was nothing there. At this point, it was 11:45, almost midnight, and I'm yawning. I go back to organizing my sleep space, and not even 30 seconds later, I hear something clank the window that I had just observed out of. Once again, I turn to check out what the hell just hit the window, and what I saw, I can't even explain rationally. Off to the side by the tree in the yard was the deer again. However, it wasn't the same deer. It looked deformed, almost malnourished. Stomach extremely sunken in and barely any fat on the animal. It just stood there, looking straight at me. It felt like it was staring into my soul almost. This deer, if it could even be called a deer, made me feel extremely unsettled and I didn't feel safe. What I saw next made my stomach sink to my feet. The malnourished deer that made me feel such a foreboding and disturbed feeling contorted and ran off on 2 legs. 2! It went into the woods out of my sight. By this time, I'm absolutely freaking out. My heart is racing, and I'm the only one awake. I immediately closed the curtains, ran to make sure the doors were locked, and I sat away from the window. Trying to process what I had just seen was troubling. No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't rationalize what I saw. This deer, literally skin and bone, contorted and folded in ways that are not even capable with normal joint function. The way it ran off on 2 legs, the way it stared at me before all of it happened, I don't understand it. I did not sleep that night. I ended up going to my aunt's bedroom, telling her what I had seen. She didn't believe me and told me, "You're just tired, so you're seeing things." I can tell you with 100% certainty that I saw what I saw. After that night, I refused to stay at my aunt's anymore, and if we would go there for a party, we made sure we left before dusk. I've heard other stories from locals in the area, from when they were hunting. I remember one mentioning a tribe or cult that lived in the area off the beaten path. Maybe it was one of them and I was just tired. Maybe not. If anyone has had anything similar, please let me know. I feel crazy because I haven't found anything similar, and I can't even talk about it to people because they'll think I'm on drugs. From a young age, I have always had strange dreams. My mother told me I used to sleepwalk. I would scream and cry, then suddenly stop and walk, straight faced, back to my room. One night, even telling my mother, I'm looking for my mom. I haven't been sleepwalking since. Dreams have always been a state of lucidity to me. I'll be sleeping and be aware of it, watching my dream play out in a sort of third-person video game, making decisions along the way. If I sleep next to someone, my dreams will get subtle influences from theirs and vice versa. My ex-girlfriend would complain of having strange dreams when we slept together, but when I was gone, she wouldn't dream. Sometimes I will talk in my sleep and hear myself talk from inside my dream, almost like an echo off a cave wall. When I was 8 years old, I started having premonition dreams. They only happen to people I have a connection with. My great-grandfather was in the Air Force in World War II, and this was my first encounter with premonitions. He was flying a plane and the engine caught fire, crashing the plane and killing him. The last thing from the dream I remember was a shadowy figure standing at the crash site. I got home from school the next day and my grandfather told me that my great-grandfather had a heart attack and died before he hit the ground in a supermarket. The second encounter was featuring my eldest aunt. She was giving birth to rocks over and over until she finally gave birth to a star. The star fizzled out, followed by another rock, then 2 stars, the second being weaker than the first. I caught a glimpse of the delivery nurse's face, and it was the same shadowy figure. My mother later told me that my aunt was pregnant for the first time after trying for years to get pregnant and having a miscarriage a few months prior. She now has 2 children. The third encounter, by far the most disturbing, yet calming encounter I've ever had. I jolt my head up and I'm sitting in a white chair in a white room. A door straight across from me opens and the shadowy figure walks out towards me. He puts his hand on my shoulder, kisses my forehead, and turns to leave through the same door. I say he because it felt like a he. The best thing I can describe is that he projected his feelings and emotions onto me. I felt like I recognized him. He seemed to be a few years older than me and felt like family. I spoke to my mother about this, explaining the way he felt in this dream. My mother is not a superstitious woman, but as soon as I told her this dream, something in her face changed. She got sullen and her eyes began to tear. She then told me that she had an abortion 3 years before I was born. One of the more recent encounters had me more concerned than I have ever been in my life. This happened around April 2020, and it was a series of 3 dreams. Jay, as I've grown to call the shadow figure, stood right behind me in every dream that night, which he has never done before. The first, my youngest aunt collapsed in her son's arms to the floor of her living room, seizing. The second, my younger sister, forearms cut open from wrist to elbow, bleeding out in the bathtub. The third, a house next to a field, engulfed in flames with some screaming from inside. I screamed at Jay, begging him to tell me why he was showing me these things, but he just stood there, ever silent and unflinching, letting me feel nothing from him. The next month, my youngest aunt had a stroke at the age of 34, while only her and her son were home. My sister was diagnosed with clinical depression and admitted to cutting herself. And the third dream is still a mystery to me, so either it hasn't happened yet, or there's something more sinister at play. Do you think the shadow figure really could be the spirit of my aborted brother, or something evil that has attached itself to me? Am I in danger of being able to connect to people in my own subconscious? If you have answers, please give me your best. I need to figure out what's going on. This happened to me when I was about 4 or 5. I used to sleep in my parents' bedroom when I was young, being afraid of the dark. I slept on a separate bed, really it was a pillow, on the floor next to my parents' bed. One night, I wake up for some reason and see what is clearly my mom walk at the foot of the bed I slept in. She walked from one end of the room to the other and out of the door. All the while, she had this very stern look on her face, as if she didn't like me staring at her. Now here's the weird part. After my mom walked out the room, I bolted out of bed to see if my mom really got up. There were two shapes in my parents' bed, and I jumped on top of them just to be sure they were still there. I don't remember if they woke up or not, but in my mind, seeing and feeling two people's shaped lumps in the bed meant both were still in bed. To this day, I remember the clothes the clone mom was wearing and what stern look on her face while she walked out of the room. I don't know what this clone could have been, ghost, alien or something, or if I was just having a weird dream. I told my mom this story when I was in my teens, and she genuinely freaked out and still is, if it's mentioned. I'm a 31-year-old male and recently moved into another neighborhood due to my job. The first week of moving went great. I met my new neighbors and they all seemed friendly, which was good for an antisocial person like me, who only lived with a cat. After living in my new house for about 2 weeks, the place became really odd. I would rarely see people outside, and even if they did come out, they all seemed scared or in a rush to be somewhere. And if I went to ask them if they were all right, they would all give me those dirty looks as if I had done something to them. I thought the best course of action after a couple of days would be just to get used to it. But after a couple of days, I come back home to find my cat had passed away, which still haunts me to this day. Since I basically spent 6 years of my life with that cat. But what was even more disturbing wasn't the fact that my cat was dead in front of me. It was the fact that it didn't seem to have a heart attack or health complications. Someone or something had crushed it. I noticed when I went to remove the body, its insides felt liquidy, and the fact that I couldn't even feel any bones inside of it. It just felt like a bag of water. After the cat incident, which occurred 4 days ago, I noticed that my neighbor's expression changed. It wasn't one of disgust anymore, it was one of pity, which makes me wonder, why would they pity me? Did they know something about my cat? If so, how? Since I never told anyone about it. I feel like I'm slowly losing my mind here, and it feels like I'm just being paranoid and I am reading too much into this. Any advice, please?